Avast mateys, it's me, Slimebeard. Today I'd like to talk about landlords and why they're a problem. These guys, am I right? First of all, they come on board, you think they're gonna be good crewmates, they don't know how to tie up the jib, and when it's time to swab the poop deck, where are they? Psst. Furthermore, I'm the one that's got scurvy. Why have to carry around these big heavy treasure chests? What? What, Jeremy? What is so important that you had to ruin my take? You're talking about landlubbers. No, it's a video about landlords, actually. Okay, what do you think a landlord is, Mr. Slime? It's like the opposite of a salty sea dog. You know, they're guys pirates don't like, because they're always going around lubbing the land. You know what, actually? When I say it out loud, I see your point. Okay, so gonna have to cut a lot of this. Probably don't need the part about proper care for parrots. The part about how they don't know any good sea shanties, that can go. I think I can keep the part about them not being able to fight off corsairs. I really feel like what you're describing is still more of a landlubber thing. I don't think it's really relevant. Yeah, let's just start it. Let's start the video over. Cut all of this out. Hello, I'm Thopslop. Today we're talking about landlords. Landlords are bad. Socialists have always been against rent-seeking. Now let me get 3 things out of the way right out the jump, because I can hear you tippity-tap typing up all your little comments. Number 1, I don't think all landlords are bad people. Like I said about cops, it does not matter to me if an individual landlord is a good person who will go to heaven. The institution that they take part in by being a landlord is what I take issue with specifically. I'm not making a judgment on anyone's entire moral character. I'm making a judgment on this particular action that they're taking. And it's not because I'm just bitter about some bad landlord experience I've had in the past. I mean, I've certainly had my fair share, like I'm sure all of you have. But my current landlords kind of own. Like, they charge me well below market price, like a quarter of market price. And they're friendly and helpful and all around pleasant and decent people who have real jobs in addition to renting to me. That doesn't change the fact that the institution of rent-seeking is fundamentally immoral and just as exploitative as siphoning the surplus value of a worker's labor. Number 2, often people will say that rent-seeking is justified because the landlord does their part by paying for the mortgage and paying for repairs, which is not true. Tenants pay for both of those things because the money that the landlord uses to pay for those things was collected from their tenants. The landlord is not paying for jack. They're spending their tenants' money. Furthermore, that money that they spent to pay off their mortgage generates equity for them and diddly squat for the tenant. If I took $1,000 from you and used $400 of it to buy you a Nintendo Switch, am I doing you a favor? Is it okay for me to do that because I bought you a Nintendo Switch? And number 3, for the brain geniuses in the comments telling me, just buy a home if I don't like it. Gee, wish I'd thought of that. Let me just check on computer. Yup, looks like the whole housing market has become completely turbo-fucked because it's more profitable for global investment firms to charge us all rent than sell us a permanent home, you ding-dongs. Now for posterity, I want to mention that I'm recording this video in the middle of the 2020 quarantine because of COVID-19, and there's a lot of talk going around about a rent strike, or the state mandating a rent moratorium. I'm not going to hold my breath for the latter. While these discussions certainly inspired me to talk about this subject, because it turns out that a lot of my fellow leftists have some wild ideas on the subject, it is not simply during times of crisis where this institution becomes immoral. These times of crisis bring it into sharper relief, but it's always immoral to practice rent-seeking. People need a place to live, all of the time. It is a physiological need. It is at the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There should not ever be homeless people, particularly when there are more homes than people. The idea that we should pay to be housed, or to have any of our basic human needs met without which we will almost certainly die, is unfathomably cruel. There is absolutely no moral justification for this, and the only reason that we as a society tolerate it is because the people who own most of the homes also tend to make the laws and dictate the boundaries of acceptable public discourse. Every person who dies of exposure on the street has been murdered by an economic system that prioritizes someone's right to make a meager profit on Airbnb over the lives of its most vulnerable people. Every hotel with an empty room has killed that person for the price of about $137 a night. That's all a human life is worth. If you're against homelessness, and since you're presumably not some sort of evil hobgoblin, you should be, then you are against the institution of rent-seeking. You are against landlords. Homelessness could not exist without landlords. Homelessness could not exist if we as a society just stopped treating homes as something it was permissible to profit from the ownership or sale of. Suddenly, the parasitic class of venture capitalists who buy up thousands of vacant homes and let them languish unused so they can use them as collateral in an enormous speculation shell game would be eliminated. You wouldn't have foreign multinational corporations purchasing thousands of homes in your town and making them unlivable for working people. In cases like this, I firmly believe that these homes should be seized and zero compensation should be given to the previous owners. Zilch. You tried to profit from making the price of living in our community skyrocket. You deserve to lose that investment. You deserve to go broke. You scumbags. But it's one thing to complain about the big megacorporations that are most of the landlords. It's quite another to complain about Joe, Jane, or Jean Schmo. Regular folk who rent out a little bit on the side to make ends meet. And while people like that may be less contemptible on the surface, they're no less exploitative. They are, as a class of people, holding you hostage. You need a place to live, and sure, you don't have to pay any of them individually, but you gotta pay one of them. That makes the interests of the small landlord align with those of the big megacorporation and against you. Any legislation that protects tenants is deleterious to the bottom line of landlords, big and small alike. And they'll fight tooth and nail against any legislation or regulation that eats into their bottom lines, even if it means keeping you safe. The more profit they can extract from you, the better. And the more red tape and precautions they have to take, the less profit they can suck out of you. That is the nature of this relationship. It does not matter how kind or empathetic a person is. Once they step into that role, they are aligning their interests with capital against their tenants. If you think your landlord could resist this pressure, if you think they're too kind or too good of a person, ask yourself how kind they would be if you stopped paying them. Your relationship with them is a negotiation in which they will do everything they're legally able to do and anything they're not really legally able to do but they're confident they can get away with to get as much money as they can out of you. And in theory, you do everything you're able to do to fight back against them and make sure that you can keep as much of your money as possible. But in reality, you need to live somewhere. They have leverage over you. It is not an equal power dynamic. It is a lot easier to go a month without one rent check than it is to go a week without a home. Landlords absolutely understand how to act as one body to protect their interests. They know how to form advocacy groups to protect their interests, all the while working to make sure you can't do the same. They know how to lobby policymakers, and they know that in any bargain with you, they have all the chips and the full weight of the state at their back. And they can and will use that to put the squeeze on you. Or to toss you from your home onto the street if you fight back even a little bit. Think about some of the nutso provisions we just accept as par for the course. You have to give your current landlord 2 months' notice before moving out, but no landlord renting to you is under any obligation to hold a property for 2 months so that you can get that settled. When was the last time a landlord did a credit check on you? When was the last time you did a credit check on a landlord? When was the last time you had the time or ability to investigate a landlord's financial reliability? To ask for references from them. If you signed a contract with someone because they held a gun to your head, that contract would be null and void. What is a lease, if not a contract that you sign under threat of being tossed out onto the street? That is extortion. I have some experience with contracts like that. I signed a contract once. I thought they were offering me salvation, but they condemned me. God damn them. God damn them, they condemned me to an Hello and welcome to the Eyeball Zone. Here in the Eyeball Zone, we absorb the life essence of small leftist projects to fuel our unspeakable thirsts. There is no human being who's ever lived whose ideas have been so thoroughly weaponized against the things they actually stood for as Martin Luther King Jr. If you're sick of people using Dr. King's memory as a cudgel to demand the obedience of the people he sought to liberate, then check out Afro-Syndicalist's video on MLK's complicated legacy and the way that his memory has been rewritten to suit white bourgeois interests. This is the first part in a multi-part series, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest if he's still planning on doing more, which I hope he is. I don't know, he hasn't updated it since January. And as of the time of this recording, it's only got 124 views. That's kind of fucked up. Kind of feels like it should have more views than that. like thousands more. Kind of feels like Afro-Syndicalist is making a lot of videos about the rich and storied history of black leftism, and that's maybe something we should all be paying more attention to a little bit. Maybe subscribe to him for that, you know? Just direct your eyeballs thusly. Do you have a small project you'd like to see featured here in the eyeball zone? Send no more than one email to thoughtslimeeditor@gmail.com with the word eyeballs somewhere in the description. Please include pertinent details like your pronouns, and perhaps you will find yourself trapped here in the eyeball zone. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen quick action on deferring mortgages for homeowners by large banks. In Toronto, major banks have granted up to 8 months deferral on mortgage payments. No such equivalent relief has been offered to renters, who must make do with a temporary freeze on evictions. Homeowners get a payment deferral. Renters get a homelessness deferral. There have been international calls for a rent strike on April 1st, which I absolutely believe people should take part in through organization with one another, tenants unions, and tenant advocacy groups. Simply keeping your rent on April 1st is not enough. You need to build a network of people with which to defend yourself and one another. In the description to this video, I've included a guide from Pardale Organize, a local tenant advocacy group in Toronto that has fought some pretty hardcore battles against big rental companies and has organized small, successful rent strikes in the past. They know what they're talking about, and they're a perfect model for how we should all be organizing in the days to come, because you bet your ass that your landlords are. Don't take my word for it, listen to the way that media outlets talk about the possibility of a rent strike. The very first Google result I got for the words rent strike was this article from some real estate publication I've never heard of called Toronto Stories, but with an EY, because it's a real estate magazine, is the joke. The whole article is about how scary a time this is for landlords, because their tenants might take advantage of them. Quote, "The Landlord and Tenant Board is currently closed until further notice and is not hearing any cases related to eviction while the COVID-19 outbreak continues. Even in a relatively smooth scenario, it can already take months or even a year for an Ontario landlord to properly evict a tenant, and the current situation is far from smooth." Oh, those poor babies. It can take months to kick someone out onto the street, and it's even harder to kick them out during the biggest pandemic in modern history for some reason. All the while, those tenants could be doing damage to their investment portfolio. Where's the justice? The article continues. In short, while the governments in this country have addressed a lot of new issues arising from the current pandemic, they have failed to so far properly inform and/or reassure landlords and businesses that their own mortgages and loss of income will be protected to some degree. And while there are a great deal of people who now find themselves unable to pay rent in the coming months, and this number will only grow moving forward, there are surely a subset of renters who will also take advantage of not having to pay rent without any consequences. The gall on these people, not paying rent just because the economy is imploding and potentially 30% of people might lose their jobs. It could take months to make them homeless. Where are the consequences when they don't give me the money? I should have the money. They don't get the money. An average approximation for the cost of maintenance fees at a downtown Toronto condo is 80 cents per square foot. So a 600 square foot condo is looking at about $400 a month in fees. Multiply that by the number of units that may not be able to afford to pay the monthly fees, and you can quickly see a crisis forming in some buildings, even if a plan for rent has been formed. But what about the maintenance fees? I shouldn't have to pay those maintenance fees just because I own the property and profit from the equity it generates. That's why I should be allowed to charge them for the maintenance fees, plus a little something on the side for daddy. The average maintenance fees are $400 a month, and the average cost of rent is a measly $2,500 a month. I'm barely scraping by here. What do you expect me to do? Sell one of my properties? Eat the cost from the decades of stolen wealth I've hoarded? Fat chance. I need that because of the revenue that I get from it. It's unreasonable to suggest I would give up something. Surely it makes more sense that the people losing their jobs should continue handing me gobs of money from nowhere because I own something they need, so that I can have the money. I want the money. The second Google result was this article from CTV, which both sides of the issue pretty hard. It opens with a brief explanation about the goals of a rent strike and talks to some tenant advocacy groups, and then we get some quotes from Ontario Landlords Watch, a landlord advocacy group with a suspicious amount of sponsors. Hey, that's weird. That's a lot of sponsors, because they also quote the Federation of Metro Tenants Association in this article. But when you go to their website, they don't even talk about their sponsors. It's weird, isn't it? It's almost like there's a lot of money on one side, and the other side is trying to protect people with less money. Anywho, the Ontario Landlords Watch CEO Kayla Andrade had this to say. There are a growing number of tenants who are planning a rent strike. This could be catastrophic for landlords who need that money to be able to make their payments, she said. Look, if you stop making payments just because you can't make payments, I won't be able to make payments. That's the real catastrophe. The third Google result is from the Globe and Mail. It contains some choice nugs. And it opens like this. Residential landlords are facing mounting pressure to ease or defer rental charges as the COVID-19 pandemic results in widespread layoffs and loss of income, leading some tenants to consider withholding payments as part of a rent strike, due to start next month. You know who's really feeling the pressure here? It's the landlords who are being bullied by all the people who can't afford to pay rent because they got laid off. Just listen to the way they framed it. It opens with the phrase, residential landlords are facing mounting pressure. It seems like the people facing the pressure are the people losing their jobs? To me? A spokesperson for Timber Creek Communities said the company would work with tenants who, quote, demonstrate a financial hardship with their rent payment, end quote. It will also temporarily suspend rent increases starting in April. Our heroes. Hey, we know you're going through a tough time right now, and that's why we've talked about it, and we're going to temporarily stop making this time substantially harder for you next month. You're welcome. Here comes another quote from our old friend Kayla Andrade. Kayla Andrade and her husband own several units in Cambridge, Ontario. One of her tenants works in retail and is temporarily out of work. This article also doesn't mention that she's the head of a landlord advocacy group, which I feel is kind of relevant information, kind of demonstrates that this source has a bias in one particular direction. Miss Andrade has told her tenant to pay whatever you can based on what comes in, but that she can only do that with so many of her tenants. Again, look at the framing. Forget the tenant's position. That's unfortunate, I guess. How is she supposed to survive off the tenant only giving her as much as she's able to? That's not fair. They should have to give more than they're able to. Miss Andrade said she expects to eventually be paid the full rent from all her tenants, and if they refuse to pay, she will file an eviction order. Rent is the rent for many reasons. No one is lowering my mortgage payments, and no one is lowering my water bill, she said. Actually, the rent is the rent for one reason, Kayla, because you're charging people to live in their home. Because you bought a home so that you could charge people money. That's the reason. It's the only reason. But if you want to stop paying those mortgage payments and water bills, I actually have a suggestion, and try this. It's a real simple trick you can use. Sell the home. Do you see the problem that you have? The problem of having to pay the bills in this home that you don't live in only exists because you bought a home to charge people to live in? Like if you didn't own it, if you didn't own a second home specifically to make money from people, someone else would pay for it, someone who lived there? Do you see that? Most tenants don't have the option of selling off their properties when times get tough. And if they do, that means they're landlords themselves. So you see how that you kind of created this problem for yourself, and it's not really equivalent to the problem that your tenants are facing? You kind of created your own problem here by wanting free money because you own a place? I could go on. Look at any news story about a potential rent strike that isn't from an explicitly leftist source, and you'll see the same framing. Here's what's happening, here's why, and here's why it would cause problems for the poor innocent little landlords, so you shouldn't take part. The reason for this is clear. It's because the class of people that own the newspapers and media companies also own property that they don't want to lose the profits from. The rich know how to come together and fight as one to protect their interests, and we have to do the same. There's nothing you as an individual can do to stand up to the property-owning class. This is not a David versus Goliath problem. It's a David versus several thousand Goliaths and also the police work for Goliath problem. The odds are insurmountably stacked against you as an individual if you act alone. The only hope we have of fighting back is by organizing. Advocacy groups, tenants unions, rent strikes, mutual aid. This is a topic we're going to be returning to as COVID-19 sweeps the globe, as the working class bears the brunt of the economic devastation left in its wake. I've included some places to get started in the description, including an FAQ for how and why to rent strike from Montreal Counter Information. Go there and read those things. Would be a good thing you could do today. You got time. What do you got? Well, you got somewhere to be? You can't go outside. You can't go nowhere. Can't go to the movies. Everybody, thanks for watching this video. I hope everybody who's watching this is safe and is practicing proper social distancing. I hope that those of you who still have to go to work, have to go out there into the world, I hope that you're keeping safe, and I really sympathize with that position. If you like this video, please press the like button. If you'd like to see more videos like this, then subscribe and hit the little bell so that you'll be notified when I release new videos, which I do every Friday at 12 p.m. I get a lot of people saying, oh, you have a new video out this week. Yeah, I put a video out every week. That's my thing. That's what I do here. I'd like to thank all of my supporters over at patreon.com/thoughtslime. I know that everybody is in kind of a weird space right now where we don't know what the future holds. So I just want to mention that if you need to drop off your support from me on Patreon, I understand that 100%. No one owes me anything. You don't owe me an explanation or an apology. This is, please just take care of yourself and be safe. You can also check out my other channel, Scaredy Cats, where I talk about horror movies. I'm wrapping up my series on the Wishmaster series of feature films, which has been a lot of fun. And you can catch me live streaming every 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on twitch.tv/thoughtslime. The native fruit of my Animal Crossing island is oranges, in case you were curious.